Welcome to Sober Solutions. We are a weekly recovery podcast not affiliated with any particular 12-step or recovery program. However, you may hear us mention them. My name is Jason, and I'm an alcoholic and addict.
My name is Chris, and I'm an alcoholic and addict.
My name is Ben. I'm an alcoholic and addict.
And welcome back to Sober Solutions podcast. Tonight is episode 28, and tonight our guest is Kenneth Watson. He is the author of 12 Faces of Sober, and Kenneth is a veteran who wrote this book around his battle with alcoholism and kicking the deadly addiction. Since writing his book that he published a year ago, he also created a podcast which allows people to share their story. And so far, that story has featured his own guests with sober testimonials, authors, veterans, and entrepreneurs. He's always had a dream to host his own show because he loves to live by his rules. So, Kenneth, welcome to Sober Solutions.
Well, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate this opportunity to come on Sober Solutions and be able to share my story with you guys and just have a great conversation tonight.
Excellent. Well, it's nice to have you. So why don't you share a little bit about your story and who you are?
Well, I was born in Jacksonville, Florida, where I currently reside. My dad was in the military, my dad was in the Navy, and we were only here roughly about 4 months of my life. And I moved around from Connecticut to San Diego, where I was raised at. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. I have 2 brothers, 2 sisters. My dad is a recovering alcoholic, so I picked up on drinking at an early age. I'd probably say about 5 or 6. My dad would send me to the kitchen to get his beer. He knew that I loved to open up the can of beer. And before I would get to the living room or the dining room, we were watching a football game, I'd take a sip or a drink or two, and just like anybody, just experimenting, thinking it's cool because this is what your dad is doing among his friends. And like I said, I grew up around a lot of alcohol. The first time I actually got drunk was I was 12 years old. Hence the name of the title, 12 Faces of Sober, the book I wrote. I grew up an athlete. Every Friday nights I would partake in drinking just like any other high school person would. Didn't really think about it being a problem at that time, but it grew to become a problem, I would say, right after college. I graduated from St. Cloud State University in Minnesota in 2003, and with a bachelor's degree in radio broadcasting. And once I worked in radio for a couple of years, that didn't pan out in Minnesota. I made the choice to move to Phoenix, thinking that, okay, I have this experience under my belt, but it didn't work out. I never worked in radio again. And so was forced to, quote unquote, work a real job. And there was no hope in that because here it is, I have a bachelor's degree in communications, but all the jobs that I was working or applying for had nothing to do with broadcasting. So that's where the depression started to sink in. And I hung out with my brother. My brother's 10 years older than me. One of my brothers is. And he actually, he drank and he smoked. And I was that guy who, drunk the Budweiser or MGDs and went from that to you're weak because you're drinking the girly drinks. Everybody else was drinking the malt liquor, St. Ides, 211, stuff like that. And I'm like, this stuff is nasty. I didn't like it. But then I grew to love it. And that's kind of where the poison, the alcoholism kind of started. And after that, basically, I got into a relationship, got engaged. She ended up getting pregnant, which led to an abortion. And that's the true height of the alcoholism was there. And I kind of was on a steadily decline. And I would probably say about 7 to 8 months later, I ended up spending a night in jail in Phoenix. And that's, I would probably say, about the second strike in terms of changes in my life. And I bounced around from house to house. I left Phoenix because I was basically homeless. And I decided to join the Army. And 2009, I joined the Army. I was a cook. I did that. I was in the Army for 6 years. the alcoholism was there. You know, in the Army, it's virtually encouraged, not more or less like, you know, they don't want you to drink, they prefer. And I was one of those that fell victim to it and was involved in a lot of different alcohol related incidents. And it pretty much cut my military career short. It was either, well, actually I am a victim of domestic violence. I eventually got married, and my ex-wife, she got arrested or was charged for domestic violence, but they sent me to rehab. And in the process, I was, you know, they said, well, we can't take this anymore. We're going to kick you out. So, you know, in between that, I was just more or less focused on just trying to get out the Army. My goal was to just get out of, my goal was to just go to school, get my master's and not work. My ex-wife wanted the opposite, wanted me to go to work. And I pretty much sunk into a deeper depression because of the fact that I couldn't process the real world. The military programmed me one way, but they didn't prepare me for life after the military. So I had 2 jobs. I pretty much just walked off of both. Well, I walked off of one. The second one, I got fired. And virtually, like I said, I was just, you know, on a steadily decline. And basically, I ended up landing in the hospital right after that. I almost died from a pancreatitis, spent 9 days, but still wasn't good enough for me. I still wanted to drink because I couldn't, you know, fathom what was going on in my life. And August 31st of 2016, I became homeless again in Phoenix. And I was at the Phoenix Rescue Mission. I did 45 days there, and basically was sober and ended up getting kicked out, and then went to Minnesota this final time and got treatment through the VA. And when I was in treatment, I applied for grad school again at St. Cloud State. Got accepted 2 days later. I did my master's program. The best thing for me was to, number one, get sober. Number two, to get into school, because it took my mind off of reality. I didn't want to work. I wanted to put my mind doing something totally different. During that time of getting my master's degree, I traveled to South Africa. I studied at Nelson Mandela University. And like I said, now it's just more or less of an awareness, is that I know that it wasn't easy of my sobriety journey, but I know that if I can, you know, fall all these numerous times and finally just focused on myself, that I know that the next person can make it too. And it's not the easiest thing, but I know that there are steps and ways to maintain and, you know, just keep the sobriety going. And so that's where I'm at today. You know, like I said, I wrote the book, 12 Faces of Sober, last year. It's been out for a year. Like I said, I have now, you know, I sell merchandise. I have T-shirts and hoodies as well that I sell. And, you know, next thing I'm trying to get into is more or less of the public speaking. I wanted to have years under my belt as far as my sobriety before I get out into the public and actually speak. And so now I believe, with not only my experience with the sobriety, but with my, you know, my bachelor's degree in communications and my master's in communications as well, is that now I can use my platform of sobriety to get the message out there that it is possible to maintain a sobriety, a healthy sobriety living.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, you know, Kenneth, congratulations on all of that success. I mean, you've really run the gamut of being in the military, being homeless, now having, you know, your bachelor's and master's degree, looking to move and inspire other people with your story. You know, and as you said, you wrote this book, 12 Faces of Sober. Can you share with us where that title came from?
As I just mentioned, 12 was the first year. Well, the 12 was the age of when I first got drunk. And so as I was initially, like I said, I wrote the book first and was kind of like toying around with different titles. And then the faces came from when I was in treatment. Each day, one of the groups that we were in, they, you know, it's kind of cheesy, but they had like a sheet, and it was like different facial expressions of describing your mood. So, you know, some days I wasn't really feeling it. So I would just be like, didn't care. I would just give a random face. As I mentioned, even some of my chapters are listed based off the expressions. So that's kind of how it came together, was the 12 faces. And then, like I said, the sober just kind of just ran with it.
Kenneth, you talked about being in the military and almost them encouraging an atmosphere of drinking. I wonder if you could talk about the fraternal nature of being in the military, but also the fraternal nature of being in recovery. Do you see any parallels there, or is that any similarities there for you?
The Oh, that's tough. To a certain extent, the military has, they have that fraternity atmosphere, but it's also in, I was a cook, so our hours of operation was different than the traditional soldier, because they would work that the 9 to 5. My day would start at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. So a lot of times I didn't interact with soldiers unless they were coming in and I'm feeding them. And that would be truly the only time. But as far as the comparing it to the recovery, I would say more or less, if the people within the unit truly cared about you, then yes. But because it wasn't always that the case, no, because when you were judged. If they knew you had an alcohol problem, you were, in my case, I was removed from the job. Everybody knew. They called you by your last name. So they would refer to my last name. Oh, Watson is this person. Oh, he's the drunk. And not so much the soldier. Now I get that respect. Now I'm getting all that support. But when I had all of these issues and problems, I was just that label as the drunk. And now I'm getting that, getting that support now. And also having people coming to me expressing they have problems with drinking.
I actually was just going to touch on that. I have a friend that is in recovery that went through the military, and he had a very similar story. He communicated that, I mean, this is probably like 20 years ago, but that it was just not talked about, not supported. If you had any sort of mental health or addiction issues, they didn't want to deal with it, and you either got kicked out or basically told, figure it out. That's essentially what he said. When I was reading your book, obviously it was your experience, strength, and hope with alcoholism, but I saw a lot of um, mental health struggles as well. You had your drug abuse, domestic violence, you mentioned mental health issues, and all those struggles that led to ultimately alcoholism. I was wondering if, you can touch on basically what the Army did or didn't do then, or if you know that they've gotten better or changed recently.
Well, I've been out now. I've been out the Army now 6 years. They have the programs. They have all, the alcohol program is called ASAP. I was involved in it. I was in 2 different duty stations in North Carolina and in Texas. I didn't even know that I had these mental health issues until I actually saw a professional, to be honest with you. And I was ashamed to open up and to be able to be like, hey, these are the type of things that I experienced as a child. These are the things that, is not normal for a kid to just be, your parents leaving all this alcohol just out in the open, and for anybody to pretty much just drink and they not even notice that the alcohol is disappearing. And so in a lot of ways, I was checking the boxes in terms of going to see these mental health professionals. But then I'm realizing that, yes, I do have a lot of issues and I need to work on them. And when I was there, I didn't really care, because it for me was like, I'm getting out of work. It was an excuse not to be around these people, but I'm still getting paid. So it didn't really matter to me. So I don't know if that answered the question, but.
Yeah, no, that's great. Obviously, besides the book, I wanted to learn about your life, and I was listening to some of your previous interviews, or I forget if it was podcast. One thing I found interesting is that you had to cut down your book due to length, and one of the chapters that you said you took out was based on a relationship or with your wife or ex-wife. Can you touch on kind of what didn't make the book that was important enough to initially write down?
Ooh.
If you're comfortable
Yeah.
expressing that.
I would say that there were a lot more instances, like a lot more situations. I picked and chose what I wanted to go in there. Put like it was whatever was meant to be in a book was meant to be in a book, because I like I said, I almost combined it. Needless to say, I combined the two chapters minus a few things, and a few people was like, "You're giving her too much energy, so she only deserves one chapter." And so I don't know. I let me think about that one.
I'll tell you what, I like your initial answer. Your initial answer. What was meant to be in the book is in the book. And I think that relates to lives, right? What's meant to be, where we are right now, is where we need to be. So although that it may have caught you off guard, I really like that initial
That's a
answer.
good question. A very, very good question. Definitely.
So, Kenneth, I just want to back us up a little bit and really understand your inspiration for the book. I also heard in previous interviews and podcasts the relationship that you had with your mother, and it sounded as though you have her as an inspiration. But can you touch on what drove you to write this book? I have thought about this myself, and just haven't had that motivation to do it. So, can you share with us?
Initially, in 2001, 2002, I wanted to write a book, and I was sitting, I was, like I said, in college, and I thought I knew everything about dating, and and I might revisit that book, but that was the initial step that I had talked about. I started in 2001, 2002, picked it back up again in 2006 or seven, and then after that, I said I'll never write it. And then when I got to St. Cloud State, and like I said, I graduated from that school in 2003, and then here I am back on this campus 14 years later. And so I'm back working, in the same, department I was working at before, but now I'm more of like in a mentor role. And so, like, my advisor, he was still there, and he was like, "I just want you to just, sit down, read a book. Students come in, you just talk to them." So a lot of students be like, "You're 36, 37. Why are you in school? You should, be doing something else." And I'm like, this is my new happy place. And as I'm telling them, like, hey, I'm in recovery, these are my first couple of months. Cause like I said, I literally went from rehab a couple of weeks later and started grad school. So I didn't really have too much time off. And as I kept talking to the students, they're like, "You need to put this on paper." And I wasn't comfortable and ready at that particular time, only because I was just getting ready. My divorce was, the process of that was just getting started, and I was just getting my feet wet as far as grad school. So I didn't necessarily dive into the book right away. So I just let all the different thoughts kind of run through my mind. And once I got towards the end of it, and I will give a shout out to my fiance, she's an author as well. And when we first met, I was telling her about my whole situation, and she was like, "Yes, you need to do this book." And so before I moved to Jacksonville, I went ahead and I started doing it the first, I think maybe about a month before I moved out here. And then I just worked on it for literally about a year, and I put it out. So it definitely was the students from St. Cloud State, definitely was my fiance. And then I think you asked a question about my mom. My mom has been, she's been right there with me from the time I was born up until this point. And she told me that we, right before I went to rehab, she told me, she was like, "What do I need to do to get you the help and the support?" And she's like, "I don't want to bury my son." And I was literally drunk. I pretty sure I probably drank the night before, had woke up that afternoon, reeking of alcohol. And that's where it was like, okay, I need to get myself together. But I still drank. I drank maybe about a week after that. But after that, I haven't had an ounce of alcohol.
It's so interesting. You mentioned that just now, and you mentioned that earlier, that there was nothing that was going to stop you from drinking. And I really resonated with that. I was just thinking about like my family, my job, my partner, my health, like all of these reasons were there right in my face to say, stop drinking, stop drugging. And I was like, no, because I want to do what I want to do. So, I know that there's this excellent message of sobriety in your book, but what is it that you want people to get out of it?
I was just having this conversation that there's hope. There's hope, regardless. The mistakes that you made in the past do not dictate what who you are today and what you can be tomorrow. And I had to realize that. It took me a lot. It took me a long time because there was so many instances where I was looking out for other people, my ex-wife, my stepkids at the time, and I never focused, like as you just mentioned, my health. So I'm like I said, I was diagnosed with diabetes right before I got sober. Now I pretty much reversed that. I've eliminated my diabetes. I've lost a lot of weight, close to like 45, almost 50 pounds, during the time of getting sober. My lady is cutting down my eating process in terms of the bad fatty foods. Now that she's back in town, I'm like, today was the first day I had meat in like 4 days. And I had to, I'm not gonna lie, I went through withdrawals, but it's just just a whole different approach at life. And that's pretty much what it is that I want people to use my situation so that they don't have to go through what I went through. And that's why I still mentor a lot of the college students at St. Cloud State. I post certain things. They'll be the first ones. Like you're very inspiring. I tell them, just don't make the same mistakes that I did in your 30s. You know what I'm saying? Just don't do it. Enjoy your 20s, do what you got to do, but just know it's going to come a point where you got to stop, some of your bad habits.
Kenneth, one of the things with this podcast is it's about recovery in any way, shape, or form. So 12-step program, smart recovery, refuge, whatever it is. Staying, as long as you stay sober, doesn't really matter how you do. So to get to 5 years or coming up on 5 years, what does your recovery look like now today?
Very simple. Very, very simple. I check in with my sponsor. I'm not gonna lie to you. I don't do AA. I don't have anything against it. I just have an AA home, which is in Minnesota. So being that I'm not here, I don't go, but I still check in. My sponsor, she's 83. And so I just try to, I try to plan my day out when I wake up. Like what it is like, okay, I got to do something for my brand. I try to, get out, get some fresh air, try to just do things that I avoided for a lot of years. And like I said, just getting out, venturing with nature, things that I was just like, nah, I'm too good to do this. Now I'm like, nah, this is what I need. I need these, to hear nature. I need to hear the birds chirping and so on.
Yeah, one thing that resonated with me is when you just said your mom communicated to you that I don't want to bury my son. We had an episode last week with our mothers, and my mom said, even a year later, she said she's still fearful of the tragic ending. And Ben's mom communicated basically the same thing, this fear. I think it's another, it shows that it doesn't matter where you're from. Addiction just spreads through friends and family in the same way. I just wanted to say that because that really resonated with me. You have a chapter in your book, I forget the exact words, like the faces of sobriety, I want to say it was.
Mhm.
Um, that was one of my favorite chapters. Can you elaborate on what that means? And because I do want the viewers to get a good glimpse of what your book's about.
You mean just the chapter on the faces of sobriety?
So I really like how your chapters, the names of your chapter. That's one of the things. So maybe touch on that one, and then just anything else that you want the viewers to know about your book in an abridged version.
Well, the book is, as I put it, is raw and uncut, because I didn't want to I didn't want it to not sound like me. Sometimes you read a book and you don't know who's really telling the story. And in my case, I felt like if I can't tell this story myself, then there's no need to even have a story. And as far as, like I said, the descriptions, it was because a lot of people have it, when they first meet me, I usually have a straight face at all times. And so, and I don't want people to judge me right away. So I could be super duper happy, but I could have a straight face, or I could be super duper upset. So it kind of gives you the layers in terms of, like, you don't really know until you actually get in there and you read the chapter to truly understand. And that's why I did it that way. Some of the chapters, obviously, I didn't use, except for my lady's gonna, she's not too happy, or won't be happy, but I used her name because that's who's important to me. The other people's names that I used are those in the past, and they're not their actual name. Well, it could be an alias or something like that. But I just felt like she's who I am today and where I'm going in my future. And like I said, I basically, the book itself, it takes you on a journey from who I was before I was drinking, the person, or the animal that I formed while drinking, and the bad relationships that came with it, and why I didn't walk away when I knew that I should have, when situations got bad. And then now the rest of the book was life after all that turmoil and all that toxicity, and how my life became more simple, and how more opportunities itself opened up. So that's pretty much the journey itself. It has a lot of bumps, but then it also has dedications. And one of the chapters too, that, as I mentioned earlier, about the important people in my life, like I said, my mom, my sponsor, my pastor, I felt that I needed to include them, because if it wasn't for them, I don't know for sure if I would still be sober, because they gave me chance after chance, and they didn't give up on me. There were others too, but those three, and my sister as well. So it was just, more or less that. But for me, I think the book can be a true resource, not only for veterans, but just people who've been in, domestic violence situations, people who have, been in relationships where, a miscarriage or an abortion. So it's like I'm touching on a lot of different situations that a lot of men have been through. And not just men, but just people in general. And it just so happens to be my life. And like I said, I wanted to bring people into my world. And that's why I was able to just tell it and say it like it was, because that's how it happened.
You call it a journey, and the word that keeps coming to my mind is evolution. Throughout this book and throughout this podcast tonight, what I've heard is your evolution as a man, as a sober person, as an individual. So I really, again, want to congratulate you on your 5 years coming up next month.
Right.
There's this hope that you want to provide the readers of your book. And for tonight, what I would love to hear is, what's one piece of advice that you would give a newcomer? This podcast is really focused on individuals who are in early recovery. What's one piece of advice you would give them on their journey?
be yourself. Honest, be yourself, be honest with whatever problems that you have. Only you know. Somebody can say, hey, you are this way, but you spend more time by yourself than you do with anybody else. And surround yourself with the right group of people. I had to cut some friends off and family off early in sobriety in order for me to maintain this duration. I definitely recommend that you don't date early in sobriety. That is not it'll it'll knock you, it can really hinder your sobriety, because I almost dropped out of grad school dealing with the situation.
A few of our other hosts may have to.
Hey.
But we won't get into that one.
I think it's a personal choice, but I think, Kenneth,
in general, a lot of people say that.
Yeah.
That people do. And Kenneth, I think what your point is know thyself.
Mhm.
Really not just know who you are, but if you don't know who you are, find out.
Mhm.
Because what was the most important piece for me was that journey of self-discovery.
Mhm.
Really stripping away all of that armor that I built up over the years of, all these lies that I had, and then really being honest with, I don't know myself. I don't love myself. And the moment I was able to be honest with that, then I could move to what you're talking about, and really being who I am, and being confident with who I am. I think that, I know for me, there are definitely things that I want to improve,
Mhm.
and I'm okay with where I'm at right now. Being okay with where I'm at right now doesn't mean that I can't get better, but it just means that I can say today that I love myself.
Mhm. Yeah, and Jason, I definitely agree with you on the aspect of loving yourself, because I didn't. And, during the time of abusing alcohol, I did not love myself, and I had to put myself above anybody else, and that's what it took, to maintain the sobriety, especially early, because the temptations are there. And what I meant by also changing your scenery is that I was invited to functions. I went to a wine tasting or something, like within the first 5 or 6 months, and I was like, I don't have no business being here, but I'm here. But I knew I wouldn't do it again. So I mean, it's just a matter of putting yourself in those situations. Do you want to be around it or not? The same way, like I can't, for me, I can't do the non-alcoholic beverages. I know what alcohol tastes like. I don't want nothing similar to alcohol. It's going to make me want to go back and drink.
I think that is an excellent point, and everyone's program's different. Everyone knows themselves better than anyone else knows them. And I agree with you. Why tempt myself? It's like walking down a dark alley at night with no flashlight or anything like that. Like, why would I do that if I don't need to do that?
Mhm.
So why tempt myself going in and having a non-alcoholic beer at a bar? Like, that just doesn't make sense to me. But maybe it does to other people, and they have to run their own program. It's just making sure that we check our motives is what I heard you say.
Yeah.
So I
I'm,
I
I'm
100%
I'm super
agree.
careful. I'm super careful. Let me tell you, because I know what alcohol I used to like, and I don't want a substitute. So I just try to stay clear and away from it. I do recall when I was in the Army and I had quit and I had tried out old duels, and I tried it for like 2 days and I went right back to drinking. I said, nah, I want the real thing. So I don't want no substitute. So it's either I'm gonna drink water or I'm not drinking anything, or some tea. My lady makes me tea all the time. So I'll take that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Kenneth, thank you so much for your time tonight. And for those who are interested in reviewing and purchasing Kenneth's book, 12 Faces of Sober, we will be posting the link to your website on our pages, both Instagram and Facebook. so that people can go and check out not just the book, but the awesome merchandise that you have as well. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity to share my story. I greatly appreciate it.
It was great. Appreciate you coming on.
Y'all have a good one. Stay sober.
So that was awesome. I think that he has a great message. I think that his message of hope is one we've heard, many times before, but he put this on paper and he is so committed to getting the message out there. And what he's doing is bringing that hope and putting it into action. It's not just his own hope, but he's hoping to inspire other people in their recovery.
When I was reading the book, it really touched on not only alcoholism, but life. It touched on relationships a lot. It touched on mental health. It touched on the effects of being in the military. And like he said, he was a cook, but the culture at that time really affected his journey through alcoholism. And I love hearing that family is there for you and they're this big inspiration. He also touches on how and why he got sober. And when you read these books, he wasn't from the Northeast area like myself. He has a different upbringing. He has different this, that, and the other. But at the end of the day, his story is exactly the same. The feelings that he wrote on his book were exactly the same as my feelings.
I think that's an excellent point of how to look to relate. If you're sitting in a meeting, if you're reading a book, if you're listening to this podcast, how can I relate to the person speaking instead of compare myself?
Yeah, and to Chris's point, he touched on a lot of different things, domestic violence, and it's really just about asking for help. It doesn't matter what you need help in. The biggest thing is asking for help. And once, that's usually the thing that holds us back from getting the help that we need. And for me, once I was able to ask for help, everything else after that was pretty damn easy. It might not have felt easy at the time, but nothing was harder than going from being in active addiction to actually getting the help that I need. And, so that was great to hear his message.
And his story was full of drastic events. We hear these things like domestic violence, like being homeless, and he has almost 5 years of sobriety. He'll have 5 years next month. He has overcome so much, and that's inspiring to me because fortunately, those things are, the domestic violence I also have experience with, but the homelessness, that's a yet for me. And I know that if I go back out, that'll happen. That'll happen to me.
Yeah, I couldn't even imagine being homeless. But I'm sure most people couldn't imagine being homeless. And it's just crazy. I was talking to an old friend recently, and his cousin is in this situation where he's homeless and they can't get a hold of him. And I remember this kid. He went to University of Connecticut, and it seemed like he had his whole life, ahead of him. And it just reminds you that addiction doesn't discriminate, and it makes you do the most irrational things. And, it just reminds you that it is a disease. And, like I said, it just doesn't discriminate.
Well, great episode tonight, guys. And for anyone who's interested in checking out Kenneth's book, please check out our Facebook and our Instagram. We will make sure that we post links so that you can get in touch with him. And as always, tonight's episode is dedicated to the still sick and suffering alcoholic and addict, especially the individual who's going to pick up for the first time tonight. Have a good night, guys.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.
We appreciate your liking and subscribing to our podcast. If you liked what you heard today and would like to support our podcast, feel free to Venmo $1 to our virtual basket at Sober Solutions Podcast. We want to hear from you too. If you have a comment, question, topic, or would like to come on the show, find us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at Sober Solutions Podcast. or you can shoot us an email to sobersolutionspodcast@gmail.com. Find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And if you like what you've heard, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show.